so much what I'm hearing that I still don't know I know. But the point that Brenda made was those negative people in your staff room. Every single school has negative influence and people in your staff room. There's no school that doesn't have a teacher that always has a different opinion. Either they have a different opinion intentionally, or when they do be difficult, you say to them, and they say, I don't have a problem. What's the problem? And I wish I knew how to deal, I wish I was taught earlier how to deal with negative people. I left it too late personally as a head. I thought it would go away. That never went away.
I don't know.
That negativity stays. And unless you deal with it, it becomes a grip, it becomes toxic, and it spreads in a school. And that's the one message I try and carry across to the principals that we work with. That if you've got a negative influence, you've got to have that conversation with them. Because it will spread. It will not go away. The other quick thing I learned was that there's no such thing as a reasonable parent. Forget it, man. No such thing. When it comes to their children, they're unreasonable. And then a lesson I was taught by a schoolgirl once, that's when something happened and I asked her, but why would they have said that? And she looked at me and she said, you know, Mr. Probert, not everyone likes you. It's the other thing I learned, women can be very frank. But I realized as a headmaster in the beginning where I tried to please everyone. And I came away with the idea, if I'm trying to please everyone every day, I'm doing something wrong. Because you can't please everyone. You've got to take decisions that are unpopular. Have you chaps fixed up?
No.
So I still do stuff that
Now you must sing.
That's no singing. I think that, you know, as this whole role of principalship, you've got to ask yourself, how did you become a principal? What was your path? What was your training? And maybe it's changed nowadays, but most of us, or I certainly became a principal when I was a science graduate, and they were scarce, so you get promoted because they want you as a teacher, so you become an HOD. Then I was a farmer at one stage in the Peru, so I knew how to service tractors, and I could also be in charge of the grounds. So then I became a deputy. So for all the wrong reasons. And then the best thing they could do would make me a principal, because I was a very, very poor teacher. And as a principal, I didn't have to teach. So I often used to wonder my path of becoming a principal was not the normal path. So maybe you've got to ask your path. What was your path? Or what did you learn? Or what can you bring as a principal? Because you can only bring your own personality. And I've always felt that in my own role, that the closer the way I run a school and my personality are together, the easier. What I'm trying to get at, if you've got to come to school every day and have to act to be a principal, it's going to be difficult because you're going to let your guard drop at some stage. So the more you can be yourself and everyone can accept you for yourself, the better it is. The last thing I want to leave you is, I wish I thought that I'd make time for myself as a principal.
I want to tell you about 3 people that said something to me over the years that I've remembered, and I want to start off by saying that to you. I'm only going to say one thing, I'm only going to make one point today of something that I wish I knew when I started running a school nearly 20 years ago. It would have made a huge amount of difference. But before I started becoming a principal, Bruce Probert, who was principal of the school that I was at, and I was the deputy, organized a chap called Terry Hepworth, who's a doyen of principals, he was principal of Fishhook. People looked up to him, and he came and gave a talk to our SMT. And I don't remember what he talked about, it was a long time ago, but he made one point that stuck with me over all the years. And Bruce has just alluded to it when he spoke now. And he said, whatever you do as a principal, you spend 10 to 15% of your daily time staring out of a window and thinking and planning and just realizing what your vision is. And I thought, not being a principal at that stage, what a good idea. Well, I can say categorically in 20 odd years of teaching, of running a school, there's absolutely no chance I spent more than 1 minute a day staring out of a window, unless it was a boy fooling around somewhere and I was going, hey! But otherwise I had no time to look out of a window and to think and to plan, and I think you could probably identify with what I'm saying. The second person was Helen Ziller. And she gave a talk similar to the gathering that we are today. And she said, leadership is about trying to make a track through the jungle. And you've got your machete, and you've got a couple of helpers, and you're creating a path with monkey ropes coming down and foliage and bushes, and you're beating your way through. Eventually someone says, are we on the right path? And with that, you shin up a tree, and you have a look, and you say, yes, we are. The problem is if you're not, and you tell them, sorry, you've cut this path for the last 2 days, and we actually should be going in that direction. But the point that she's trying to get at is that we actually got to climb the tree and have a look at what direction we're going, and to get away from all the bush cutting and head down and all the nonsense that happens in our lives every day. So in 2 different ways, they're saying the same thing. And then the third person was a program on History Channel that I recorded this last weekend, and it was on President Obama. And it's an hour and a half interview with him about his tenure as an American president. And they said to him, everyone was, American right was having a full go at you. You passed controversial laws like Obamacare. You tried to get gun reform through. You tried to pass stuff on Syria. How did you cope with all this flack? And we can all, who've been involved in running schools, you know exactly the flack that you can get from all directions. And how did you cope with the flack, Obama? And he said, I knew where my true north was, and I stuck to that. So 3 different people saying something very similar. One saying, stay out of a window and just think where you're going. Another one saying, get up a tree and get away from everything and plot your route. And the other one saying, know what your true north is. And I thought I'd start off by saying that. Now, I feel rather like a parent today who looks back at his child who's in his 20s now, and you think, my heavens, I could have done that differently. And I definitely feel that as a principal. I look back and I say, there were decisions I made that I'd like to remake. I'd like to revisit that situation, handle things differently. That will always happen. But I'm going to tell you about one thing today, that really I wish I had understood it properly 20 years ago. I was invited to Perryvale Primary School one Saturday morning early this year, and they had a workshop on the trauma and the... Why is this not working? It's not... No, we've seen that one. It's not changing on here. I'm obviously going to have to wing it. What is changing it? They had a... there we are. No, there we are there, not there we are there yet.
Scroll down there.
No, you do that. Right. Are you going to stand there and change it for me? Now I've forgotten where I was. Hey, so it's at Perryvale Primary School, and they invited me to this seminar, Saturday seminar they had on trauma in the brain. Now Perryvale is in Lotus River, and there are obviously huge problems there. The society, and you know what I'm talking about, which is happening to a lot of schools. Society there, community there is in trauma with all the gangs, the drugs, and everything else that's happening, and the abuse. And they brought in someone from America, an American professor of psychiatry, and she conducted the seminar. And she said something that just resonated with me, and that's what I'm going to pass on to you today. But first of all, you have to understand what trauma is. Trauma is fear, or it is fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen. Now, it doesn't matter what school you're at, and whether you have horrendous abuse, or whether you come from a school that is slightly safer, our children are going through trauma all the time. They're all having divorce. They, not them, their parents. But they are, the community and society we live in today is tough. But even the trauma of arriving... Now, let's give you an example. Something happens at breakfast table, parents shouting at one another, the boy gets the heck in, and he goes and just walks out of home and goes to school without his books. He gets to school, and the teacher says, "Why haven't you done your homework?" Trauma. Even if he's just forgotten his book on the dining room table that morning and hasn't brought his homework, that is traumatic. If he gets late to class, it is traumatic. So we as teachers have to know how to handle 8-year-old trauma, 13-year-old trauma, 17-year-old trauma. It can be serious trauma, which needs counseling, or it can just be the normal day-to-day trauma that our children are in. Can you move on to the next one? I'll push that. Maybe my talk should have been on how I've learned to handle computers. No, that's not what I want. That's but all right, it doesn't matter. No, it's meant to flash on one after the other, but it's not doing that now, is it?
I don't have a program loaded here, so I'm trying to work on it.
Okay, I was going to do them one at a time and be all fancy, but clearly that's not going to happen. Now this is not I'm not a doctor here, and this is not anatomically correct, and I'm not a biology teacher. But if you just imagine the brain as that circle, and if we divide the brain into three parts, when a child is in trauma, his brain is going to go into one of those sections. It could go into the reptilian brain, which I'll explain in a moment, which is about survival. Could go into the mammalian brain, which is, let's try and sort this problem out, or could go into the human brain, which is the cognitive brain. Right, now, if you go into the reptilian brain, that is about survival. It is about fight, flight, or freeze. Now have a look at those faces there. The one on the top left is probably fairly familiar to you. Not the boy himself, but the expression. When you tackle someone and you say, why didn't you do your homework? That is quite threatening. It's judgmental, and what is the reaction? Could be the reaction of that little girl in the bottom left, which is freeze, and giving the look of, which we all know so well as principals and teachers, you're not getting anything out of me. Or it could be the look of that boy there. One of the other boys could well be saying, now, well, coming back at the teacher or the principal and saying, you're always picking on me. I'm sick and tired of you picking on me. Especially if there's been some trauma at home that night and now the teacher comes on, they get flying. They go straight into survival mode. This is where they find excuses. So if you push someone into the reptilian brain, and reptiles, by the way, eat their own young. So if they are hungry, they're one of the few creatures that eat their own young. So if they are under pressure and they're hungry, that's what they do. Now you put a child under pressure and he's going to go down into reptilian mode, and his reaction is either to come back at you or to behave like that girl in the bottom left-hand corner and sulk. But it's not going to be a reaction that's going to get your homework or get you working together with this child. So finding excuses is a big part of this, the reptilian brain. And of course punishment. Now I'm going to refer to that a little higher up. Right, so that is, and the classroom climate counts for a great deal. Teachers cannot teach in a toxic zone. And by toxic, it is where there are the negative emotions of fear. Why haven't you done your homework? Why are you talking? So, but the negative emotions of fear, anger, you picking on me, hatred, you always picking on me, resentment because why me? Why didn't you ask the person sitting next to me? And disillusionment, and the whole world's against me. It's happening at home, it's happening here. You cannot teach in that environment. So it's a job of a leader to change that environment. What we got to try and do is work in that middle part of the circle of the brain, which is to get our children and our teachers and our parents and everyone we work with into that middle section of the brain. And so, if you say why are you talking? You stick them straight down in the reptilian phase. If you change the question a little bit and say, help me to understand why this has happened, you immediately are changing the conditions. And so that mammalian phase is what mammals do. Mammals look after their young. Mammals nurture their young. So that's the caring phase. It's the nurturing phase. It's the empathy phase where you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. It's the building of relationships. It takes time. You cannot expect someone to communicate if you're only meeting them in the first period of the year. It takes time to build up relationships, and it takes time to build up teamwork. This is the phase where you are saying, I'm on your side. So if you've got really serious trauma in your school, then you're saying to a girl that's been raped, you're saying, I'm on your side. I'm going to work together with you on this one. That is to stop her going down into the reptilian phase where you actually get no response whatsoever. Right, now, because this thing isn't working, I'm meant to have one lot of things on and another lot of things off. So just ignore that writing and I'll just talk to the lines. The lionesses, as you all know, do the hunting. The Lord and Master waits for it to arrive. Don't know if that sounds familiar. And they hunt in their prides and they support one another. But it's interesting to note that when the lioness comes back, having failed to pull down the wildebeest, what the reaction is from the rest of the lionesses. And there's, like this picture shows here, now there's preening, there's licking, there's not hugging for lions, but they are showing concern. Now, if I think of the years that I coached cricket, and when someone dropped a catch and came off the field, there's no ways I went and said, tough luck, mate, or, it was, what the hell are you doing dropping with that catch? It's the main batsman in the opposition. And I think as coaches, we sometimes put our children straight down into survival phase and makes them tense, and then they can't go out and play cricket afterwards. My golf is the case in point. The minute I hit the ball in the bushes, I'm in survival phase, because I'm the hell in with myself. And modern day coaches like Gary Kirsten in cricket, and it's affecting more and more of our sports, are saying mistakes are going to be made. Keep the folk out of survival phase, keep them in mammalian phase, because that's the only way that you're going to get any kind of cooperation and support. And all what that writing said, I just want to pick up two words which you can just make out there: synergy and a symbiotic relationship. If you're going to get people into that phase, synergy means 1 + 1 = 3, and symbiotic means what a bee is to a flower. And the flower needs the bee, and the bee needs the flower. The children need the teacher. The teachers need one another in the staff room. They need that support. They need the other lionesses licking them, if I keep on that metaphor. And they need a principal. The principal needs the teachers. Teachers need the principal. So it's symbiotic. Everybody's got to work together. To go and be putting folk in the bottom phase into the reptilian phase doesn't work. So how do you handle, as someone said earlier on, the teacher that's coming late? And just to go on the attack is not going to work. I'm not for a moment saying that there are no consequences. And I'll come on to that one in a sec. And here we have the whole brain here now, and we are talking about the cognitive brain now, the top half of the brain. Now this is where we as teachers, the top half of the brain, that's where we as teachers, we are trained to handle that part of the brain. We are not really trained to handle that middle part of the brain. But that middle part of the brain is learnable. It is teachable. And the most important people to start teaching it are the foundation phase. Because they've got to learn to communicate there when they've got problems instead of just lashing out. They've got to learn to listen to other people there. And that's got to be carried on in the rest of the school. So back up to the cognitive phase. What we as teachers are trained to do. We train to get them to think. We are trained to get them to reason, to be rational and to solve problems. And here's a big difference, and this is where we're possibly not well trained, is that we must impose consequences rather than that bottom word at the very bottom here of punishment. Now the difference between consequence and punishment is consequence made up of two Latin words. I was a Latin teacher. Mean to follow, or to work out. Con means together. And so you follow, you work out what the procedure is going to be. So right at the beginning of the year, you work out with the children, what are the consequences of this class if you don't do your homework? Then everybody knows where you stand. You've worked it out together. Punishment is where you've said, oh, you haven't done your homework, and then the teacher just imposes something. That puts you down into reptilian phase. And we have to train the teachers in our schools and our staffs and everyone else and parents that consequences, something we've all worked out together, is the way to go. And so that takes people up into the cognitive phase. Now, those arrows which should all be flashing on now at this stage are all there. But you can't get, I'm going to say this one slowly because this probably sums up everything I wanted to say today. You can't go from the reptilian phase to the cognitive phase at all. If you are punishing, you're going to be leaving them in the reptilian phase, and it's going to take a long time to get them to cooperate. They might do because they got a clap last time you did something and they're frightened of a clap. But they'll do it out of fear They won't do it because they want to work with you, and you're not going to get very far then. So coaches, I still don't understand, as a supporter of the top soccer club in England, Arsenal, I still don't understand how Alex Ferguson got away with some of his coaching methods, like throwing boots at people and kicking things at people at half time. I don't know if you've gone through that, how you go out in the second half. I'd like to speak to someone who's gone through all that. But coaches who shout and scream just create tension, and you can't go from reptilian phase to the cognitive phase. That red line right up the middle there, that is impossible. You can't do it. So if you got folk under trauma, you have to be in the mammalian phase, and from there you can start saying, help me to understand, what are we going to do so that this doesn't happen in the future? And that is a lesson. I think as heads we sort of go through this jungle and sort of hack away, and we don't always realize what we're doing, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. But now I think this gave me the why, because now I understand why I should have worked. Is that a signal to stop now? No, I've forgotten where I was. Now I understand the reason why that I should have forced myself never to go into that reptilian phase, and to have talked teachers through the same as well. And you know what we often have, and you saw from that cartoon a few slides back, is that if you had the teacher in the reptilian phase cross now, because this is a fourth person, a child this period, not to have done the homework, or to have talked. Now the teacher is shouting, and the pupil is now the Helen. So you've got two people in reptilian phase having a full go at one another. You're going to go nowhere. It is absolutely imperative. The second thing that I want you, if you remember nothing else, it is absolutely imperative that the adults stay in the mammalian phase. Because if they don't stay in that phase, you've got no hope. And how often have we as leaders had to go down, school leaders, go down into classrooms where there's mayhem, because the teacher's shouting, the pupils are shouting, and everyone's in reptilian phase. You have to train your staff up and show them diagrams like this. That if we're going to go forward, then you've got to be in that middle phase. And you've got to get your parents on board. Adults have to stay in the mammalian phase. Right, my last two slides. I've given you the why, and I've shown you the brain, and why it's important to stay in that middle phase. But for the how, and those are just pictures of adults working with pupils, but for the parents, it starts at the gate. It starts how you greet the parents. It starts with how accommodating and welcoming you are to the parents. It starts with how much you prepare to listen to their gripes and their grievances. Thanks for bringing it to my attention. I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't done that. Now let's as adults try and work it together. I've forgotten how often I've maybe got it slightly right, in that I'd often say to parents, listen, we the adults here, let's work on this for the best of the children. They're angry because I've made them have a haircut or whatever, wherever we have problems. And then they don't see the reason for that. And I just say, as adults, let's work this out together. So for parents, it starts at the gate. How welcoming do you make them feel in your school? And how much of a contribution can they make in your school? And do they know that? For the teachers, it starts at the staff room door, on how teachers treat one another, on whether they appreciate one another, whether they remember birthdays, whether they call one another by their first names. Do they acknowledge when the chess team has done well and gone away? Do you acknowledge at the end of a term when you're studying the data of your exams, praising the ones who've risen up from last term? For the learners, it starts at the classroom door. I'm absolutely sold on the idea of every class waiting outside the classroom, and the teachers saying something to every child when they come to class. Comments like, trying to get them and make sure they start your period off in the mammalian phase. So getting the culture of the school right. And as the children come and in you saying something, I like that question you asked in class yesterday. Are we going to have good questions from you today? Well done on scoring that goal yesterday. Yeah, you polished your shoes well. That's a nice smile. Or whatever. You're just getting positive comments to everyone. And then that child that's just had a row with his parents and walked to school without doing the homework, you spot that very quickly. If you've got a relationship going, and you're saying, talk me through that face. Just hang on there. You and I are going to have a chat. You see the rest of the folk into the class seated, and then you say, something's happened. We're going to deal with it afterwards. Tell me about it afterwards. But I want that face to change in this period. And if it's a normal troublemaker, then you're telling him, I don't want any trouble from you today. And for the school and for our country's future, it's got to start in foundation phase. Teaching our children to talk properly to one another and to communicate properly. And then just something you could think about for your staff meetings, because it's a very good staff development little exercise here, on how advanced are you in the mammalian phase, and EQ, I suppose, another way of putting it, in your school. And I've just put 11 questions on there. I would have put 111, but I only had one slide I was going to use on it, and you can make up your own. But just to say, well, those are all things that you should be doing in the school, and I'm happy to, so you're taking photographs, but I'm happy to email this to you. Yes, but how do we communicate? Principal to teachers, teachers amongst teachers, teachers to pupils. How do we treat one another? How do learners treat, teachers treat learners? And just going down, how are decisions made in the school? So a staff meeting on what 3 things do we do well, and what 3 things do we do badly, put them on some kind of spreadsheet, put it up on the staff room and break up into groups and say, well, we all here say that decisions are top down. Let's work out how we're going to make sure it's done better now, so that we don't start shouting at one another down in reptilian phase. And then the final word. And that last sentence was meant to flash up dramatically at the end. So just imagine it's not there, and I'll just say it dramatically. But times have changed. We as school leaders must face these changes. Our young people, as we all know so well, are faced with fear and anger with what's happening to them in their communities and in their families. Unfathered children. Our communities are no longer functional villages. They say it takes a village to raise a child. And you see what happened in District 6 in the old days, where families looked after one another. Grandmother sat on the porch, and there's reported youngsters who were misbehaving to their parents. That doesn't happen now. People lock themselves away in the houses behind either electric fences or in flats or wherever, but they're locked away, and we seem to have lost our it takes a village. So we, the village, you, the teachers, principals, governing bodies, are the village. And you've got to try as far as you can to get your parents involved in this one. But schools have to give their children the opportunities to handle their emotions, to develop their critical thinking skills, and to deal with conflicts right from foundation phase. They've got to learn to work out where their North Star is. Thanks, Obama. And then, I wish someone had said this to me 20 years ago. I think I would have run a school infinitely better. And that's that.
And as a kind of it took me 6 months. And there are kids that walk past the corridors and kick the doors open. They hurl abuse at the people. And the same people end up in the office. And I presented an idea of actually how to actually deal with that. And I found the majority of these learners were in grade 9. That's obviously, we know it's a stage where you just become an adult. I then proposed to the principal give me a class that would be away from everybody. In other words, nobody passes that door. And I decided to teach them all the subjects and integrate it, and not to follow the period structure. Because as a teacher, I found that when you are just about getting the child to understand, the bell rings. One of the most destructive features in structural problems in education. We don't want to admit it because we've been part of it for too long. And so I did that with these learners, and they were basically from gang-related people. Some of their parents were more gang and more rude than what they were. But the one part that I found is a common factor. There was no spirituality in the children. They had no knowledge of any Bible, nothing. They had the majority of people there, there's no knowledge of anything. And I decided to work with them for the whole year. That time he's still at CTAs. Because I had this freedom of dealing with the concept right through and changing the syllabus, changing the period at the time when the kids have the interest. Because when you work from the interest perspective, you got the child. If you present your lesson from your presentation of your lesson plan, you don't necessarily have the child. But if you've got the interest of the child, you can work with him. And I realized with a young person, you cannot work with mind to mind. You got to work with heart to heart. And that was the beautiful part of our relationship. And if you have learners in grade 9 that have to see 10 teachers with different personalities, and he's only building a personality, it's difficult for him to find himself. So if you have one teacher that actually does everything, you can build on one particular person. And by the end of the year, we finish our CTAs before everybody else.
Wow. Thank you.
Perhaps a question to any of the panelists to answer. At this stage, where we're having a huge exodus, from the teaching fraternity due to retirement, and looking at succession planning, what did you do in your schools to ensure that when you left, they were capable, empowered people to continue? I say this sincerely, and please don't shoot me down. There are many principals who are good at what they do, but because they are so busy doing what they do, the other management team members do not have the opportunity to grow in certain fields, especially, for example, financial management, etc.
I think that the term SMT should be changed to SPMT. It should be a Senior Management and Planning Committee or team, and they should be organizing all aspects of, and helping to organize through an organogram all aspects of the school. And I think one of the most important routes that principals should be taking is to make sure that they've got workable organograms where everyone in that organogram has got a job description which they sign for. And it must be a job description that is pertinent to that school. So you can work out whatever organogram you like, and you can make someone's in charge of building, someone's in charge of admin, someone's in charge of sport, and very important to have someone in charge of academics, and they have the job description that you as a principal want that person to do, and they sign for it, and then you swap those roles around. And sometimes by natural attrition someone goes and you swap anyway, but hopefully by the time one leaves school you've got enough in your middle management team to actually take over, and in fact they will go to other schools too because they've been trained up. I don't know if that answers your question from my side, but Bruce is dying to say something.
Just very quickly add that just very simplistically, I think the SMT have got to meet once a week. We try and get that as an ideal. We appreciate that you're at a full timetable, so you're not going to be able to do it in the timetable that you're all free, so it has to be after school. It's 1 hour with an agenda, once a week the SMT must meet.
Any other comments?
I just think that one of the most important tasks of a principal is to grow teachers. I think the teachers grow the children. I mean, actually, if you really think about it. But I think that one has to consciously be looking at growing all your members of staff and identifying jobs that they can do and give them opportunities over and above the sort of strict structures, so that you must create opportunities for people to try out things. And then the other thing is you've got to trust them and say, try this out. If you fail, I'm there and I'll take the fall. If you succeed, you get the credit. And you have to have a culture like that, that you have got their back and they can dare to try. Sure. They must have the confidence to dare to try, and they can come and ask you. It's one of the things I left out. You need to encourage people to ask.
Thank you. Question?
It's a comment.
Comment? A
Yes.
minute, sir.
A minute, 2 seconds, thank you. I know school structure sometimes is to have SMT meetings once a week. But what I think schools are also overlooking is to meet those SMT members one by one. If you engage them, because each one of them is unique. So if you meet them as an individual, I have found that's the way you can actually better build them, because you zoom into that person's space, what he's doing, what he can contribute. Because sometimes SMT members just see themselves as head of science only and not as a manager of the school. But in the one-on-one, you've got a chance to expand and even to encourage that person. So other than having structured SMT meeting, look into one-on-one also.